Hey YouTube, it's gonna be Zartimus here, just doing a little bit of reading. We're gonna be working on Encyclopedia Eorzea Volume 1. We're not quite at the start of the book. I'm gonna have to chop that footage myself, but I'm trying out something new. So instead, we're starting from about page 18 on Eorzea's creation myth. If you're interested in hearing more of this, or you just want to catch me live and have a bit of a chat between my reading segments, twitch.tv/Artemis should be in the description. But we're going to go ahead and get started. Creation. Creation myth in Eorzea has taken on countless forms over the ages. One prominent astrologian and theologian, Dullahan of Charlian, has spent his academic career studying the overlap in these renditions and has compiled what he claims is the definitive tale. In the beginning, there was neither light nor darkness, only the world. And it was not until Althik emerged thence in his nakedness did time take its first step forward. With him, the Keeper also carried weight, and with weight were the realms of land and firmament defined. Yet Althik would not be alone over long, for soon from the world did another step forth. Her name was Nimia, and she was but a mewling babe who could do naught but weep, and soon her tears had created a vast lake. Althik, seeking companionship in the empty realm of his creation, took the young goddess under his wing, and cared for her as one would a daughter. As Nimia grew, however, so too did their love for one another, until it could no longer be contained, culminating in a divine coupling which resulted in the birth of two holy daughters, Eorzea the sun, and Menphina the moon, and with their advent was day and night conceived. So did countless cycles of light and darkness pass before from the world, once again did another step forth. Thaliak, bearer of wisdom and knowledge, looked upon the silent and unchanging lake left by Nimia's tears, and coaxed from it a river to carry that water to the far corners of the realm. Eorzea, drawn to Thaliak's sagacity, professed her love to the new deity, and begot him two daughters, the first being Limlane, who took the water created by her grandmother and expanded it into the world's seas. The second daughter was the lonely Nofika, who, wanting for companionship, created her own playmates, and thus brought life into the world. It was not until life had spread throughout the land and newly created seas that a new god appeared, though whence the others did not know, for the world lay dormant. His name was Oshan, and where he wandered did towering mountains rise from level plains. With the formation of these spires did cold wind flow from on high down to the warm seas and back up again, carrying life that was once reserved for land and water into the skies. Those winds did bring love into the heart of Limlane, yet though she longed to be with Oshan, his wanderlust prevented the two from ever being joined over long, and lo, did they never beget children of their own. This was a time of great creation, but also of great chaos. Oshan's mountains rose and fell at his whims, Thaliak's rivers flowed hither and thither, and Limlane's seas ever expanded, swallowing entire swaths of land before the gods even knew they were gone. To bring order to this chaos, Nimia pried forth a mighty comet from the heavens and gave it life, directing it down to the world that it may destroy the excess her sons and daughters had wrought, while bringing harmony once again to the realm. And for many days and nights was the world calm, the gods content in the order which now reigned supreme. That is, until the world woke from its slumber and beckoned forth two final deities, Biragot and his younger sister, Halone. It was feared that the untamed and ambitious siblings might once again usher chaos into the world, so to see that they were properly disciplined, Nimia quickly made them wards of Rhalgr, the Destroyer. A builder by nature, Biragot resented his new stepfather who could teach him only of destruction, choosing instead to spend most of his time in the tutelage of Thaliak. The scholar bestowed upon his eager student the knowledge he would use to forge the tools and techniques of creation. Though more open to her new father's teachings, Halone too grew restless, longing to test her strength. An opportunity arose when Oshan invited the young goddess on one of his journeys. It was during these travels that Halone's ambition slowly transformed into a lust for battle. While on the road, she would challenge every creature she met, honing her skills and methodically devising new techniques for killing. When Nofika, mother of the life, learned of Halone's wanton destruction of her creations, she was angered beyond words and swore revenge. But the Fury ignored the matron's challenges, widening the rift between the two. Oshan, feeling responsible for this rift, devised a plan to calm Nofika. From within the mountains of his creation, Oshan summoned a fount of magma which spewed forth onto the land. Upon cooling, the magma took the form of the 12th and final god, the dual-aspected Nald'thal. With Nald'thal, Oshan had provided a god to oversee the souls of those who met their deaths and provide them with peace in the afterlife. Satisfied that her creations would no longer wander the void aimlessly, Nofika agreed to a truce with Halone. And with the advent of the 12th and final god was the pantheon complete. But before they could call an end to their toil, they first required a realm in which they could reside and watch over their myriad creation. To this end, they created the 7 heavens, and to there did they finally retreat, bequeathing the rule of Eorzea to mankind. Alright. Hells and Heavens. Every god and goddess of the 12 is associated with one of the 6 controlling elements. When the deities deemed their work on Eorzea complete, they proceeded to create the firmament, the result being 6 astrally aligned heavens aspected to each of the 6 elements, and a final 7th heaven to rule them all. However, a residual product of these heavens were 6 similarly aspected hells, ruled by an all-encompassing, umbrally aligned 7th hell. The 6 lower heavens are represented in the sky by 6 constellations, star formations, which astrologers also perceive as gates that, when opened, can allow a person to become attuned with the heavens and manipulate their aether. These constellations revolve around the pole star, which is believed to be the gate to the 7th and final heaven. While some sects of 12 worship have different views of the afterlife, most believe that the righteous are promised a place in the heavens, while sinners are doomed to an eternity of punishing trials in the hells. A belief made popular by a famous theologian and playwright of the 6th astral era states that upon an evil man's death, he will fall to a hell that corresponds to the sins he committed in his lifetime. Once suffering an eternity in payment for these sins, he must journey through the remaining 5 upper hells and witness the sins of his brothers, before finally arriving at the gate of the 7th hell, where his heart will be weighed. If it is heavy with sorrow and repentance for what he has done, he will be sent to the heavens. But if it remains light, he will be admitted to the 7th hell, where he will suffer forevermore. The hell and heaven of fire. In the heaven of fire sprawls an endless city built by Nald'thal from golden bricks fired in the heat of Azemia's sun. Here reside the just and the fair, the honest and the philanthropic. The hell of fire was formed when the rubble left after the creation of its heavenly counterpart was cast from the firmament into the dark pit and set alight. Here burn those who wrongly judged their peers, who tricked their customers, and those who gave and received dosers. The hell and heaven of water. To create the river which runs through the heaven of water, Nimia melted a star, to which Thaliak added the essence of knowledge, and then poured it forth from Azure. Here reside the scholars and inventors, the teachers and entrepreneurs. From the bed of the celestial river did forsaken droplets fall to the pit, where they settled and stagnated, creating the hell of water. Here drowned deceivers, counterfeiters, mountebanks, and false prophets. The hell and heaven of wind. In the heaven of wind rises a towering mountain range, atop which Oshan looks out upon an endless sea ruled by Limlane. Here rest explorers and adventurers, mountain climbers, saints, and those who rescued the aforementioned souls from peril. Rogue gusts from on high incite terrible tempests in the pit, creating the hell of wind. Here mountain bandits, defilers of land and sea, and pirates suffer as the air tears flesh from bone and soul from flesh. The Hell and Heaven of Ice. In the center of this heaven rises a lofty palace of ice, ice made of frozen moonbeams and carved with the Fury's own spear. Here reside epic heroes and gallant knights, the benevolent and the faithful. From Halone's gilded palace do piercing icicles plummet to the pit, creating the Hell of Ice. Here suffer cowards, deserters, and adulterers. The Hell and Heaven of Lightning. In the Heaven of Lightning, one will find a towering clockwork spire built by Biragot with metal forged from a comet and powered by Rhalgr's levin bolts. Here rest engineers and architects, revolutionaries and conquerors of evil. Levin-charged fragments of the comet plummet to the pit to form the Hell of Lightning, a place of damnation for vandals, slumlords, and warmongers. The Hell and Heaven of Earth. To create the Heaven of Earth, Nofika planted a single sapling which Ulthik instantly coaxed to maturity by bending time itself. Under this mighty sentinel's boughs sit farmers and naturalists, historians and archaeologists. Leaves fallen from the tree and left to rot in the pit are what create the Hell of Earth. Here lie buried thieves and defilers of nature, liars and revisionists. Currency and measurements. Eorzeans employ a system of units and measurements which serve to quantify various aspects of their daily lives. From currency to units of length and weight, familiarity with these concepts and their origins will afford the reader a deeper knowledge of the realm and the references employed by its residents to describe the world around them. A history of coin. When the sixth umbral calamity came, laying waste to the land and swallowing up once proud nations of magi and wise men, the currencies minted and circulated by these civilizations lost their value, and the economy of Eorzea returned to a primitive system of barter and trade. As the realm recovered and rebuilt itself after the dawn of the sixth astral era, the currencies of Mach and Omnivore came back into limited use, their values assigned roughly according to the worth of their material components. As city-states and nations came to flourish, certain interests took steps to mint their own currencies, with Sharlayan and Ishgard quick to follow suit. As contact between nations in these times was limited at best, no effort was made to introduce a universal standard, and for years many and myriad currencies were exchanged throughout the land. This changed in the years of peace that followed the Autumn War. Trade and diplomatic relations between nations flourished, and for reasons of economic convenience, voices calling for a united universal currency grew louder. In the year 1477 of the Sixth Astral Era, the leaders of Eorzea's 6 great city-states came together, and after some debate, reached the decision to mint a universal currency to be used the realm over. So it came to be that Gil, the coinage once used by the ancient Allagan Empire, was reinstituted as the standard currency for all the land. On the design of Gil. In times of Eld, coins would typically bear designs inspired by heroes, leaders, or religious imagery of the nations that minted them. With the introduction of Gil as a universal currency, however, a consensus of experts from all nations made the decision to adopt neutral designs, ones not rooted in the traditions of any one culture or nation, in the interest of avoiding needless debate. To this end, the face of Nimia, the spinner, was chosen to grace the 100 Gil coin. An exception to the rule can be found in the commemorative 1 Gil coins issued by the Grand Companies for Foundation Day, which are emblazoned with the images of the leaders of their respective city-states. Weights and measures. Eorzeans measure length and distance in ilms, bulms, yalms, and malms. The ilm is a fundamental unit of measurement, roughly equivalent to the length of an adult Huron thumb. with the longer fulms, yalms, and malms calculated using the ilm as a base. Needless to say, as the size of body parts can vary wildly from person to person, these units were somewhat imprecise in the early days of their use. While this would rarely be a problem within close-knit communities, confusion quickly ensued as trade and commerce spread across the realm. Matters came to a head in the year 986 of the 6th Astral Era, when a pirate who had come to Limsa to procure sailcloth from the black markets became enraged when his purchase fell short of the length for which he believed he had paid. Though contradicting accounts of the incident exist, most agree that the ensuing scuffle left some 50 men dead or wounded. Admiral Agatsar Romerslan of the Limsa took swift action, promptly arresting the pirate who had caused the ruckus, lopping his thumb clean off, and declaring that it would henceforth serve as the standard measure of an ilm throughout the land. Cast iron replicas of the buccaneer's severed digit were produced in bulk and distributed around the realm to serve as one ilm rules, and disputes over vague measurements soon became a thing of the past. One ilm can be seen as an approximation for an adult Huron thumb or a ripe Roland berry. One fulm, or 12 ilms, can be seen as an approximation of an adult Huron foot or a grown chocobo tail feather. One yalm, or 3 fulms, can be seen as an approximation of a bastard sword blade or an adult Lalafellan male. One malm, or 1760 yalms, can be seen as an approximation of the distance an adult Ellison can run in a 10th bell, or the approximate height of Ogamora. One ons can be seen as an approximation of an adult Huron thumb in weight, or a 100 gil coin. One pons, 16 onzes, can be seen as an approximation of a merchant's scale stone, or a block of kookaroo butter. And one tons, or 2,000 ponzes, can be seen as an approximation of a fully matured gobu, 600 bottles of wine port bread, one standard overseas shipment. Encyclopedia Eorzea, Book 2, Her History. The History of Eorzea. To fully understand the realm of Eorzea, one must first delve into her past and witness the violent cycle of birth and destruction which forged the land from darkness. The First Umbral Era, the Calamity of Wind. Eorzea is characterized by elemental calamities, which plunge the realm into short yet harrowing periods of chaos, known as Umbral Eras, followed by extended periods of prosperity, known as Astral Eras. What then, you may ask, of the land before the first calamity struck? Drawing from the songs and writings of countless civilizations, theologians believe prehistory to be a tempestuous time of uncontrolled creation, overseen by a mercurial god or gods, creation which abruptly ends with the destruction of all that exists, ultimately allowing for the rise of mankind from the wreckage. Historians and scholars of biological fields, on the other hand, claim that mankind could not have simply appeared, and suggest an evolution of the species in the thousand years preceding the first calamity. What the two groups do, however, agree upon is that modern history begins with the First Umbral Era. It was not until the advent of the Sixth Umbral Era that, by the process of elimination, scholars were able to declare with certainty that the elemental calamity which ushered in the First Umbral Era was indeed connected in some way with wind, possibly in the form of terrible hurricanes, tempests, or tornadoes. Recent dealings with the Mughals of Mogham, in which village elders have spoken of a wind-driven disaster previous to the first 5 calamities, serve to further reinforce this theory. The First Astral Era, a time of stone and fire. It is during the First Astral Era that mankind is believed to have learned the essentials for survival, the ability to carve stone tools, and the ability to make fire. Tools allowed for the rise of agriculture and a departure from hunting and gathering, which eventually resulted in the abandonment of nomadic lifestyles and saw the establishment of villages and towns. Within these towns, civilization thrived, and basic sciences such as animal husbandry and simple metallurgy were discovered and refined. As the towns grew, so did the hegemonies that oversaw the towns, until finally kingdoms were born. However, kings, as is their wont, are rarely content with what they have, and soon the leaders of the newly formed countries abandoned the creations of tools for forging of weapons, and the era descended into blood-stained madness. Equipped with picks and axes, historians believe mankind made short work of nature's bounty. Cave paintings dated to the first astral era suggest the existence of hundreds of now lost species, from two-headed bison to winged coral-like scalekin, to furs reaching over 1,000 yalms in height. The Second Umbral Era, the Calamity of Lightning. Despite the constant wars waged by kings seeking to expand their domains, mankind thrived, its numbers multiplying with each passing summer. To house and feed the people, forests were felled and fields planted. To forge their tools and weapons, mountains were gutted and skies blackened. For countless years, nature suffered this wanton spoiling of the land, until finally the scales were tipped. Mountains of fire belched forth ink-stained clouds which covered the skies and thrust the realm into eternal darkness. And from the skies fell an endless rain of white-hot levin bolts, which razed fields, boiled lakes, and split the very walls of mighty fortifications. For a full 12 moon and a day did nature's fury reign. Fearful that the gods meant to purge the land of mankind once and for all, the people abandoned their homes and towns and fled underground into caves. Awaiting them here, however, was not salvation, but death, for the caves became breeding grounds for pestilence and plague. As the people sat trapped in darkness, watching their families meet slow, painful ends, they concentrated their efforts on the one path left to them: prayer. Theologians believe it is this measure and mixture of desperation and focused prayer that gave way to the very first magical incantations. Now fully aware of the land's boundless anger, mankind turned to the heavens for strength. Through prayer, the people of Eorzea discovered that hidden deep within the words lies magic. Magic that, when fueled by faith, can empower. The Second Astral Era. Faith in above. And so, through primitive magics did mankind endure until the skies had finally parted, those showing proficiency in these esoteric techniques rising to positions of power within the communities. The people were drawn to these charismatic leaders who accredited the fall of the previous era with the faithless kings and their unquenchable avarice. They claimed that only through faith and prayer would they be saved from a similar fate, and thus were the first organized religions born. In but a matter of years, kingdoms centuries in the making were replaced with theocracies, populated with men and women eager to prove their worth to the gods, that the divine beings may spare them from the land's wrath. Church leaders convinced the people that through the building of massive temples, monuments, and effigies would they achieve peace and salvation. To adorn these constructs so that the gods would smile upon them, the people perfected the arts of painting and goldsmithing. To protect these constructs from those who would defy the gods, they solved the riddle of steel. To better bask in the gods' light, mankind reached high to the heavens. Church commissioned construction of countless cathedrals, temples, and sepulchres during the Second Astral Era saw the rapid advancement of stonemasonry, the constant mantra of "to the heavens" pressuring early architects to conceive techniques that might defy the very laws of nature. The Third Umbral Era, the Calamity of Fire. Faith and fear had given the churches absolute power over the realm. However, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Soon the desire for plenary control pit rival religions against one another, culminating in the advent of an extended dark age of holy wars, witch hunts, and cleansings. Towns were burned, children sold into slavery, all while men and women died in the thousands. With no one to tend the fields at home, crops withered, leaving those few who had not marched to war to starvation. The coffers of the victors swelled with the spoils taken from their enemies, but there was nowhere to spend this newly acquired wealth. The road to rebuilding would be a long one, but the people were convinced that if they maintained their faith, they would rise as they had done once before. By this time, however, the gods had grown weary with mankind. The hubris displayed by the church enough to convince the heavens that the people of Eorzea must, once again, be humbled. In the following moons, the sun grew large, parching the earth and sapping the life from all creation, be it plant or animal. Verdant fields and lush forests were reduced to dust-choked wastelands, the people who relied on them for their livelihoods stricken with famine. The calamity of fire was upon them. Recent discoveries of the skeletons of large plant-eating fauna and the Grand Wake have some scholars convinced that Thanalan's modern-day deserts were once a lush grassland, lost in the fires of the calamity that ended the Second Astral Era. The birth of an empire. Approximately 5,000 years ago, Eorzean civilization reached what can arguably be considered its peak, at least in the sense of technological advancement and overall influence on the rest of Hydaelyn, with the advent of the Allegan Empire and its spread north to Ilsevard, east to Othar, and south to Mericidia. The following section examines the rise and fall of the realm's most prosperous age. Saint Coinoc's Find. Nearly 6 centuries ago, a determined young man in Ul'dah by the name of Coinoc would stumble upon what would prove to be the greatest discovery of the Sixth Astral Era, relics of the great Allegan Empire. An order of Nald'thal seminarian, Coinoc was immensely clever, consistently receiving the highest marks amongst his peers. The order had high hopes for the young prodigy, and envisioned him a future leader in the church. These hopes crumbled to dust when Coinoc became infatuated with stories of a long-lost empire briefly mentioned in Holy Scripture, Alleg. Despite being less than a year from graduation, he abruptly abandoned his studies and began a fevered pursuit of knowledge on a subject most in the order regarded as, at best, allegory. Turning a deaf ear to the pleas of his professors, Coinoc was expelled from the seminary, and eventually ostracized by his closest companions. This, however, only fueled the young man's passion to prove his detractors wrong. To fund his obsession, Coinoc became a merchant, every coin earned put into the acquisition of ancient tomes and the overseeing of exploratory digs in remote locations across the realm. It was not until the year before he passed away, over 5 decades after his search began, that Coinoc finally found what he was looking for in a sparsely populated corner of Mordona. Once a laughingstock in academic circles, Coinoc was now a hero. Universities begged him to join their staff, while sponsors from across Eorzea showered him with coin to finance future excavations. Further vindication was achieved after his death, when he was canonized not by the order which forsook him, but by the followers of Ulthich, the scholar. Coinoc's name lives on to this day in St. Coinoc's Find, an organization dedicated to the continuation of the eponymous archaeologist's work. The destruction wrought by both the Battle of Silvertear Skies and the subsequent calamity altered the land in such dramatic fashion that locations once submerged under hundreds of yalms of water were now exposed, revealing Allegan ruins which had not seen the light of day for countless summers. The scholars of St. Coinoc's Find have since begun excavations in these areas in hopes of making their next big discovery. The Third Astral Era, the Rise of an Empire. The communities which emerged in the aftermath of the Calamity of Fire, while fearful of the gods, were wary to once again make them the centerpieces of their society. Pursuit of the divine had incurred the wrath of the heavens, so to avoid a similar fate, mankind chose to place distance between itself and the gods. As a result, society began to focus on the individual talents of its people. Faith in the gods gave way to faith in oneself. With this newfound confidence, mankind began producing some of the greatest minds in history. New discoveries in science and technology were being made each day. Civilization was advancing at a rate unseen in the previous two astral eras, and at the forefront stood a man who would see that civilization reach to the far corners of Heidelin, Zonde. Considered by many to be a genius in his own right, the highly ambitious Zonde used his uncanny intelligence and charisma to build a nation that, while founded in science, did not deny the magic of the Second Astral Era. Those few descendants of the priests and witches of the Second Astral Era were welcomed and given places where they might hone their skills and wield them for the good of the people. As Zonde learned more of magic's potential, he assigned many of these mages to his newly formed army, where their unmatched strength on the battlefield allowed the young leader to subjugate neighboring lands with limited Allegan casualties. In less than a year, Alleg was the largest nation in Eorzea, and Zonde crowned himself emperor. Upon his death, Emperor Zonde was interred in a tomb built within a crystalline cavern located in Mordona. Reasoning behind this being that it was thought the concentrated levels of pure ethereal energy might repair the corrupted flesh and restore Zonde's soul to his new body. The actual consequences were quite different. The origins of etherochemistry. Etherochemistry. It goes without saying that the Allegan Empire would never have survived, let alone expanded and thrived, had it not been for the might of Zonde's hand-picked mage cadres. Their most important contribution to the Empire, however, was not solely spell-weaving, but the incorporation of their magics into existing scientific principles. Siege engines enhanced with magics launched their projectiles farther and with more precision. Ensorcelled treadwheel cranes lifted blocks 10 times their maximum load with a fraction of the manpower. Once the secrets of Aether had been unlocked, they were applied not only to war, but to everyday societal needs, from construction to medicine, transportation to communication. The field came to be known as aetherochemistry, and upon its back would the Allegans ride into a golden age of prosperity. There is an artist's rendition of the Allegan Empire as envisioned by the scholars of St. Coinach's Find. Massive metal frames unearthed at the find in Mordona suggest that the Allegans employed airships, not unlike those in use today. A golden age. Zonde knew he would not live forever, but he was not about to allow his life's work to come to naught upon his passing, so he carefully groomed his offspring to carry on his legacy. As a result, in the years subsequent to the first emperor's death, the direct descendants of Zonde fostered the growth of the empire by dispatching its armies to the far corners of Ilsabard and Othar. While there was resistance, the empire made short work of all who stood before it, and in time, there was not a city in the 3 great continents where the imperial standard did not hang. With no more enemies to fight, peace prevailed, and the people thrived. The focus of the empire now shifted from expanding its borders to bettering the lives of those who lived within them. One such undertaking involved the construction of a massive array of spires at Silvertear Falls, designed to gather the very rays of the sun and deliver that energy to the homes and manufactories of the empire. With the completion of Circus Tower, or the Crystal Tower, as it would come to be called in the scripture of later eras, the Allegans began their reliance on Myriad Machina to ease their daily burden and allow them to concentrate on bettering their minds and their souls. For 3 centuries, not a war was waged on the 3 great continents, and the bloodshed which had spawned the empire became but a blemish on a forgotten age. The miracle of aetherochemistry had given the Allegans everything they wanted and more. Yet, a man who believes he has everything will not strive to create anew. Lacking the drive that once made it great, society slowly fell into disarray. The people had grown complacent, abandoning learning and drowning themselves in leisure, relegating any and all work to machina. Birth rates plummeted, while suicide became increasingly common. Leaders grew corrupt and complacent, leading to isolated uprisings in the worst of cases. In the years preceding the Seventh Umbral Era and the re-emergence of the Crystal Tower, scholars had very little to draw upon regarding the sun-collecting spire's appearance. Early attempts by artists commissioned by St. Coinox Fine to recreate the Crystal Tower, while beautiful, were ultimately far different than the actual construct. Amon's scheme. The Empire was becoming crushed under its own weight, inching ever closer to destruction while its people sat glassy-eyed in their homes, dangerously dependent on the luxuries science afforded them. There was one man, however, who was not about to stand idly as oblivion crept ever closer. A talented technologist by the name of Amon. Amon believed that what the Allagans needed to save them was not another invention or technological breakthrough, but a strong leader. A leader who could ignite the fires in the hearts of men and wake society from its apathy-induced stupor. A leader the likes of Emperor Zonde I. Instead, however, of waiting until another individual with the qualities of Zonde appeared, Amon believed better success would be had with a more direct approach, resurrecting Zonde himself. Techniques to temporarily restore life to mortified flesh by growing it anew had already been discovered by Allagan scientists. Amon believed, however, a temporary return would not be enough to ensure a rise from the ashes of the once mighty Allagan Empire. What were needed were the secrets to eternal life, and so Amon began a series of experiments, combining chimerobiology and cloning, in a last, desperate attempt to achieve immortality. In the early stages of those experiments, he used brigands and revolutionaries to test his newly developed techniques. Once his methods had been refined, he moved next to the Emperor's bloodline, and finally to his own self. The results were promising, prompting Amon to move to the second stage of his plan, the unearthing of Zonde's tomb and the resurrection of the Emperor. Utilizing the solar energies collected in the Crystal Tower, combined with his newly perfected vivification techniques, Amon achieved the impossible. Zonde walked Eorzea once again. Amon, one of the few great minds in a land that had seen the slow yet steady numbing of the people's intelligence, Amon long lamented the sorry state of Allag, concentrating his early scientific efforts on developing medicines to increase mental capacity. He soon realized that it was not knowledge that the Allagans lacked. If anything, they had too much. What his people lacked was a leader. With a renewed sense of focus, Amon shifted his studies to the field of vivimancy, and was soon conducting experiments on his own flesh in order to attain his final goal, the resurrection of Zonde I. Scylla. A high-ranking archmage of the Allagan Imperial cadres, Scylla was tricked by Amon, a lifelong adversary within the Imperial Court, into participating in the mad technologist's experiments with immortality. Promised never-ending life and limitless power, Scylla begrudgingly agreed to the alteration of her corporeal form, only to wake from the anesthetics to find the snapping maws of wild hounds, creatures most despised by the mage, where her own head had once been. Glacia Labalus. One of Amon's few voluntary subjects, Glacia Labalus, commander of the Imperial Honor Guard, was fiercely loyal to the Empire, enjoying himself by personally tracking down and mercilessly crushing any and all seeds of rebellion. The experiments were successful in granting the commander immortality, ensuring eternal service under the great Emperor Zonde. However, side effects saw his already dark mind further fevered. General Phlegethon. Leader of one of the many rebellions that erupted in the waning years of the Allagan Empire, Imperial annals paint Phlegethon as a murderous villain. Writings of the common folk, however, reveal the general's status as a hero of the people. Adored though he was, the revolutionary leader was eventually captured by agents of the Empire, and his body was forcibly altered through sorcery and science, his mind broken and conditioned to obey. Eyes southward. Amon's genius and obsessive nature made dangerous bedfellows, leading to the death of countless subjects before ultimately bearing fruit. Not only was Zonde resurrected from his millennium-long slumber, but had achieved both immortality and an otherworldly vigor in the process. Over the next few days, the Emperor was briefed by Amon of the myriad changes the realm had seen in the 1,000 years since his death. The advancement of civilization, the extent of the Empire's reach, and the state of her people. Once aware of what he had to work with, he moved quickly to right the ship, starting with the assassination of the current Emperor and any loyalists to the regime by the Glacia Labialis-led Imperial Honor Guard. With the throne reclaimed and potential challengers to Zonde's authority conveniently disappeared, the new Emperor wasted little time restoring the heretofore impotent Imperial army to its former size and strength, and ordering it on its first mission, the full-force invasion and occupation of the southern continent, Mericidia. Just as Amon had predicted, Zonde's return had revitalized the Empire, igniting a fire in the hearts of the complacent and providing them with purpose. The army's ranks swelled with new recruits. Manufactories began hiring manual laborers to meet increased demand for weaponry, and scholarly circles were abuzz with new discoveries and inventions. The Allegan Empire would be great once again, and the road to greatness led south. The Mericidians, however, were not about to give up their homes without a fight. While the Empire's first wave of attacks were largely successful due to the fact that they were unexpected, subsequent raids into Mericidia proved more difficult. The native peoples of the southern continent banded together under the leadership of the Dragons, who also claimed dominion in Mericidia. While without equal on the three great continents, the Imperial Army's chimerical war beasts were no match for the Dragons' fiery breath, and countless casualties were suffered. This, however, only served to further motivate the scientists of Allag in their ungodly pursuit of might through biological manipulation, and it was not long before they had created abominations which exceeded the might of the Mericidian horde. In a decisive and bloody battle, the Allegans slew the Dawnworm Bahamut, paving the way for immediate occupation, or so they believed. Kalia, a product of both mechanical and biological ingenuity, the steel-solid aberration was developed in the Aetherochemical Research Facility in Azisla to combat the dragon legions of Mericidia. This mechanized hydra could withstand not only attacks from razor-sharp fangs and talons, but also the white-hot flames of dragon breath, and proved invaluable in the campaigns waged on the southern continent. So effective was the creation, the Allegans would eventually place one within Bahamut's metal gowl to guard the Great Worm. Jowl. The Warring Triad and Bahamut. With the dragons all but defeated, the Mericidians turned to their gods for salvation, invoking terrible beings known as Icons in one final attempt to rid their land of the Allegans. While there is no record of any Icon, currently primal, summonings on Mericidia prior to the Imperial invasion, immediately following the fall of Bahamut, multiple tribes were simultaneously successful in calling forth their deities from the Aether, suggesting that a third party may have been involved in the passing of the specific knowledge required to do so. Of these icons, 3, Sephiroth the Fiend, Sophia the Goddess, and Zervan the Demon, or the Warring Triad, as they would come to be called, would prove the most problematic for the invaders from the north, temporarily driving the Allegans back to the Mericidian coasts. A furious Zonde demanded a solution from his imperial cadre of mages, threatening to kill a man a day until they fulfilled his seemingly impossible request. How could one rid the world of a being that could simply be resummoned the moment it was slain? In their desperation, the mages turned to the very enemy they fought for inspiration, and before too many of their brethren had succumbed to the Emperor's wrath, they discovered a new branch of spellcasting, which would ultimately become the roots of modern summoning, and utilized it to neutralize the power of the Warring Triad by imprisoning them instead of defeating them outright. Victory over the Icons should have marked the end of conflict in Mericidia, but the southern continent was not yet willing to concede defeat. Devastated by her mate Bahamut's demise at the hand of the Allegans,
The worm Tiamat endeavored to resurrect the Dawn Dragon in the same manner that the tribes of Mericidia summoned the Icons, as a deity. What rose from the ashes, however, was but a shade of the Dusk Worm's beloved Bahamut. Twisted with rage, the great worm unleashed his fury on the Alligans, erasing almost immediately any advantage the Empire had seized. Bahamut, one of the first brood, lived for countless centuries as ruler of the southern skies, until being slain by the power-hungry Alligan Empire. When the Duskworm Tiamat learned of her beloved's untimely fate, she, with the aid of Mericidia's remaining dragon horde, chose to ignore the warnings of her kin and attempt summoning of the spirit of Bahamut. Her sorrow and anguish, combined with the rage of her kin, however, corrupted the spirit as it returned from the lifestream. The result, a mad tyrant little resembling what had once been the Dawn Worm.
Victory in Mericidia. Emperor Zonde found great joy in the ever-changing tide of battle, and is claimed to have said that he never felt more alive than during the slaughter of the Mericidian campaign. He also believed that a man was only as strong as those he slew, and therefore would welcome the onslaught of his enemies with open arms, using them as opportunities to gain even more power. The war with Mericidia fueled the advancement of Alligan technology and deepened the Empire's knowledge of arcane magics. Not only could a dragon or an icon now be captured, but it could be tamed, controlled. Its very life essence could be tapped and used as a source of seemingly endless energy, a fate that ultimately befell the warring triad. In a breakthrough by the Imperial mages, communion with Voidsent was achieved, ultimately culminating in the signing of a pact between Emperor Zonde and the self-proclaimed ruler of the Void, the Cloud of Darkness. In exchange for an unlimited supply of vessels which would house the minions of the Void, allowing them to remain in the corporeal realm, the Emperor merely demanded that the Voidsent fight for him on the shores of Mericidia. With each enemy slain, a new vessel would become available, allowing for the immediate summoning of a host and subsequent possession of the body. The more the undead killed, the larger their ranks swelled, until not even the mighty Bahamut, reborn, could overcome their numbers. The great worm grew gradually weaker, as the crystals required to maintain his strength became scarce due to overharvesting. Unable to wield his former might, Bahamut was finally captured and fitted with neurolinks, effectively making him a tool of the Empire and putting an end to the Mericidian campaign. The Alligan Empire had claimed yet another prize. The Cloud of Darkness, one of the undisputed rulers of the Void and an entity of immeasurable strength, occupies the highest rung of the hierarchy of 12. This terrifying Voidsent entered into a dark covenant with Emperor Zonde in a bid to invade the physical realm via heretofore sealed Void Gates. That covenant applies to not only the Emperor himself, but all of his bloodline, ensuring that as long as an heir remains, control over the Voidsent Queen is absolute. The Fourth Umbral Era, the Calamity of Earth. Mericidia had fallen, and the Empire was now the largest it had been in its entire history. The Emperor, however, was unable to savor his victory over long. War had quenched his lust for blood, but with its end came a sense of emptiness. Experiencing death had shown Zonde the very limits of life, and he would no longer be satisfied with the mundanity of reigning in a time of peace. An obsession with slaughter and destruction tightened its grip on Zonde's mind, and slowly drove him to madness. His following orders would only serve to prove this. The Emperor bid the encapsulation of the neurolinked Bahamut into a massive iron sphere. The sphere would be launched into the heavens and set into motion around the moon, where it would use the worm's affinity to fire-aspected aether to gather energy from the sun in a form more concentrated than the weak rays which make their way to Heidelin's surface. With that energy, Zonde would open a gate to the void the likes the world had never seen, and from beyond would he summon the very Cloud of Darkness herself, so that she might rain her destruction upon the corporeal realm, eventually driving the world to that edge of death that the Emperor longed to experience once again.
Unsurprisingly, very few Allagans shared the same twisted aspirations as Zonde, and the seeds of unrest quickly took root. Independent resistance cells joined together to form an army, which drove the Mad Emperor and his few remaining loyalists out of the Imperial Palace and into the Crystal Tower. Unfortunately, this maneuver was too little, too late. The satellite containing Bahamut was activated remotely by Zonde, commencing the transference of ethereal energy. The Void Gate would open soon. Yet, it never did, for Zonde and his technologists had made a grave miscalculation. While the tower had been fortified to endure the increased energy flow, the land upon which it was built could not withstand the sheer force being applied to it. In a matter of moments, the ground began to crack until it crumbled away finally, swallowing the Crystal Tower and Zonde with it. The Resistance's victory, however, was short-lived. The Crystal Tower's collapse triggered a chain reaction of tremblers which shook the entire realm, toppling mountains and literally tearing the land asunder. In mere moments, the Allagan Empire was laid to waste. Yet even as the Crystal Tower was sinking, Emperor Zonde's most trusted aide, the technologist Amon, invoked powerful magics and halted the flow of time within the structure. The tower and its denizens fell into a deep slumber. Many of the Allagan Empire's most dangerous experiments, including the creation of chimerical bioweaponry and the core components used in the Bahamut satellite, were conducted under a veil of secrecy at the maximum security floating research complex known as Azus Law.
Princess Selena's legacy. With the Crystal Tower buried, a civilization which had almost completely relied on the tower's energy to function was plunged into utter chaos. Machines ground to a halt, lamps fell dark, lines of communication and transportation were severed. Those who served on artificially levitated employment sectors such as Azus were suddenly trapped. The flow of supplies on which they relied for the maintenance of their facilities dried up. Without the energy and manpower to keep them in check, the chimerical aberrations contained in these quarantined areas escaped their cages and soon turned on their creators. Realizing that control would not easily be regained, the floating islands were quickly abandoned by the remaining Allagans. They would remain uninhabited by all but the chimeras for 5 millennia, until their rediscovery at the dawn of the 7th Astral Era. Though the worldwide calamity had claimed the lives of the majority of the Empire's population, including those of the royal bloodline, there was one descended from Zonde I who survived the quakes, the young Princess Selena. Sharp-witted for her age, the princess was quick to realize the true implications of the fall of the circus tower, and the fact that it had not truly been destroyed, only buried. While the spire served to trap the horrors within, it had also served to preserve them. Lacking the means to destroy the tower, she instead chose to utilize the power that had been granted her via her ancestors' most unholy pact, for as long as the blood of Zonde line remained intact, there would ever be a force which could keep the cloud of darkness under control. Utilizing the remnants of Allagan biotechnology, Princess Selena transferred her bloodline and the power it held to a trusted ally, with hopes that it would endure until it was again required. Proof of this power became known as the Allagan Eye, and can still be seen today in many of those with ancestral ties to the Mikote Seeker of the Sun G tribe. Ironically, it was another calamitous event that saw the re-emergence of the Crystal Tower from its 5,000-year slumber. As for the horrors that lurked within, it was as Princess Selena had feared. Zonde, Amon, and the Cloud of Darkness had not perished in their time buried beneath Heidelin. Fortunately, nor had the Imperial bloodline, and through the efforts of the G tribe and a brave band of heroes, the threat of domination at the hands of evil was once again thwarted. Une and Doga. Seeking to raise Zonde from the dead, the technologist Amon looked to the first emperor's descendants. His subjects were Une and Doga, 2 members of the royal bloodline. Using techniques perfected in his dark laboratoriums, Amon created dozens of copies of each. He called them clones, echoes of the original, made flesh yet lacking a soul. Thus, these experiments were put to use,
as weapons when Aemon could glean no more from them. Though Une and Doga both supported the Emperor's second ascension, they learned of his descent into madness with horror. They gave unto 2 clones their spirits, a measure for if they found themselves fail to thwart the Emperor. The clones are said to have been imbued with an unbending purpose, to end Zonde's unholy covenant. Before the original Une and Doga could prevail, the Crystal Tower entered its eon-long slumber. When it awoke after the calamity, so did the 2 clones within. Fortuitously, they then came upon a group of scholars calling themselves Noah. After many trials and tribulations, it was this fellowship that saw an end to the first emperor and the fruit of his terrible ambitions. So that will be all. We've covered everything up to just about the fall of the Allegan Empire properly this time. And next weekend we're going to move further into Heideland's history. There's a good chunky amount of content before the end of history, though, as this does seem to cover all the way through Heavensward, at the very minimum, in Volume 1 of Encyclopedia Eorzea. So we will probably take another weekend or 3 to get through it all. And I'm looking forward to it. Until then, I hope you've enjoyed. Make sure you check out twitch.tv/Artemis below. Reading streams are always on Saturday, and I play games Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday while hanging out with chat. If you're interested in any of that, feel free to hang out, and hope to see you next time.